we move on to the next panel discussion, and it is about future of language technology in India. That is the theme. The moderator for this panel discussion is Kalika Bali, Dr. Kalika Bali, who is in Microsoft, and a good old friend, and has been working in the area of, I would say, language technology, because she works both in speech and text. So she will be moderating the panel. Then along with her, we have Asif Iqbal.
So I don't think there's anybody in India who's doing NLP and who's not had some influence or affected by Professor Sangal. So I came back to India because I wanted to work on Indian languages 20 years ago. It's exactly 20 years. I came back in July. And I actually started working at Simputer, which very few people here will remember, only us older people, which came out of ISC. And that's how I met everybody here, actually. And my first collaboration was here, where Professor Sangal put me in touch with Kishore Prahlad, who's now with Apple. And we were trying to build a speech-based travel app for Simputer. And now some of the things that we tried to do, then we did LDCIL when I was working with HP Labs. And we also did this local language speech technology initiative. Deepti and Radhika should remember that, LLSTI. And I was just thinking about these things and thinking that, for a lot of these things, we were way ahead of our times. The kind of enthusiasm and support, and I think Partha also probably met Professor Sangal at the time of LLSTI and LDCIL when we were at HP Labs, right? The kind of support and enthusiasm there is for Indian language technology, both speech and NLP right now, we were probably way ahead of our times. I think it's a very exciting time to be in India and working on language technology. And without further ado, I will start the panel. Welcome, Asif. Welcome, Partha. So we've been having a very interesting panel in the morning. And I would like to just kind of continue some of the themes from there. So we talked about democratization of language technology through deep learning. And I think democratization, when people who are in the technology frame, when they use the word democratization, they think of it as like all developers can use a technology without ever having to think about how it's made, or understand how it's made, or advanced science, as Professor Yagna said, right? So they think all technologists can use the technology, the models, etc. Whereas some of us think that democratization of a technology is the ability by everybody to use it. From a user perspective, not just from a technologist, do not need to understand this technology and can then deploy it in various forms. So I just wanted both of you to kind of tell me if you think the current neural framework has democratized technology, and if yes, why? This is like a very school standard question, but I'm really interested to know, because both of you work really deeply in the neural technology space for language. So Partha, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Kalika. So firstly, it's a real honor for me to be participating in this celebration in honor of Professor Sangal. I mean, we all know that he's the leader and a prominent figure in speech and language technologies in the country, and has been like a real inspiration for me as well. And my apologies for not being able for being there in person because of some commitments in Bangalore. So I guess Kalika, your question is about democratization of technology through deep learning, and my own take on the priority that I assigned is also on the user-centric part of it. How because we are developing all of these technology and systems, I guess for the end users, so that they are able to use it and access to information, and the tasks and their life get better one way or the other. So I guess current take is that there is an opportunity for that democratization, but it's not going to happen by default unless we are conscious about that. For example, say the deep learning based methods or the multilingual models where I have been focusing quite a lot. So they allow us to build a single model spanning across multiple languages, which also allows us to do transfer of knowledge and supervision across these different languages, right? So now, because of the feasibility of having those kind of models, it provides us an opportunity to, say, bootstrap systems in a new language where very limited amounts of resource is available. Now, if we didn't have this kind of say deep learning based models, then we would have to build multilingual models. Then we have to say build separate models for each one of those languages. And then the users of those even lower web resource languages get left behind because of the amount of involvement of resources that will be needed to build a language specific model in each one of those languages. So multilingual models, which are powered by deep learning, in my view, opens up that opportunity to scale across languages and democratize technology, language technology development, both speech and text based across languages. But there are research challenges also in there. While that's an opportunity, but we also need to develop additional new methods because data sparsity is an issue that we need to handle. But at least we have an opening, I feel, in terms of the democratization and the scale across languages. And language, I guess, could be say one dimension, but you could have other types of accessibility, say sign language or other types of languages, not only natural languages, could be other forms of democratization, which again these kind of models could help. So I think I'll stop here. Love to hear other stuff.
Asif.
I think I will echo what Partha said. So the deep learning current progress in the deep learning, if you see, and the kind of data that is available is in the form of, say, text, the speech, and the video. All the data is, as in the previous lecture said, I was saying that data is the problem. So I agree on that because a lot of refinement is needed, but still there's, I think, given an opportunity to build sophisticated models. So transfer learning, now if you see the less resource languages, for example, or the languages which are endangered in nature. So there are techniques like transfer learning, people are using multilingual training, how can share the information across the languages. Those kind of training has shown a lot of success. For example, multilingual BART, you have seen Mirror, for example. There are plenty of other research has been happening. So now, also, if you see that it is true that the linguistic knowledge obviously is very important. In our research also, you have seen, particularly in the missing translation, so we are dealing with the languages like Maithili, Bhojpuri, these kind of languages. So only the NMT cannot give you the best result because you don't have on the data. So the morphology knowledge, the syntax knowledge, even for the European languages, you have seen for interactive NT that use of the syntax, use of the super tags actually helps in improving the performance. So I think there should be a fair balance between also you see that symbolic AI and the neural-based AI. So these combinations is very promising in today's world. The another aspect is that if you see that the large protein language model that is showing a lot of, let's say, remarkable performance, then if you see the prompt-based solutions using the language models for different kinds of solutions like sentiment analysis or natural language generations, you'll see that unevenly many of these language models have some sort of biasness in them. So yes, it is true that we not only should focus on keep on building very sophisticated models, but at the same time, we should see that how we can address these kind of challenges, how we can reduce the bias, how we can promoting the already prepared language model to solve a specific task. So I look at this progress from this point of view. So I'll share my experience again. Thank you.
Thank you. So two different perspectives of the same problem. So since you talked about the user side of democratization, and you also touched upon all the biases, etc. And in the general global sense, everybody thinks this is an exciting time to be doing NLP and speech, because you can actually put out very good systems that people can really use and very quickly. So that's the exciting time. And if we think that it's an exciting time for Indian languages as well, Indian language technology and Indian users, what, according to you, is the influence of language technology going to be for the Indian users? Like, how is it going to change their quality of life? And how far are we from what you think of as a change of quality of life?
Right. Okay. So if you see that most of the applications in language technology are have societal applications. They are grounded in the actual world. I'll put up a few statistics. So, for example, if we talk about inclusive digital India, the purpose is to enable all the citizens of the country with to make them digitally literate. Now, I see that we cannot make them digitally literate until and unless they are given the flexibility of the freedom to communicate in their own languages, right? So very recently in 2022, Business Standard, they reported that if you see that the use of this internet, okay, so there has been phenomenal growth. So there are 646 million internet users now, and 45% active growth of internet users in rural India. Okay, that has happened. But outside urban is 28% of the growth. So in rural India, also people are using internet a lot. And its number is 352 million, so as per the statistics. Also female users, if you see that balance between how the male and female. So there is also a ratio of 60 to 40, and there has been a tremendous growth of the 61% growth in the last few years. So this kind of statistics shows that if you see that using actually reach to the ground level. So now we need to see that in any language, because culture, linguistic diversity. So now we have ample opportunities to develop the language technologies to make this particular program of Digital India successful. Also, there are plenty of other applications. For example, if you see that educations now, the new education policy, the education for all. So we need to translate all kinds of, let's say, lecture notes, the contents into the regional languages, into the vernacular languages. So speech-based technologies has become very important. If we talk about the law and judiciary, so we are doing a project for translating the judiciary documents from to the other. So huge number of cases are pending in every layer of the court, starting from the lower level to then the district level court, then high court, the Supreme Court. So now this the translation is a very important technology there, because once the decisions taken in the lower court are actually reached to the higher court or the Supreme Court, everything is in English. So also you need to translate all these documents into one language, common language. And the decisions that are taken in the Supreme Court, that need to be translated back to the to your own language. Then if you see that the conversational system, for example, information extraction, text simplification in the legal documents, automated context review generations, or context signing, for example, if you follow some kind of predefined template, so that actually can help a lot, reduce the a lot of human efforts. Agriculture, if you see, there are a lot of applications of information extractions. Then also these days the chatbot, if you can build the chatbot, not only chatbot for the farmers, okay, so or to solve their basic queries. Then obviously the health is another important sector. So a lot of applications are there, starting from the records, information extraction of medical record, question answering system, helping the let's say patients with the basic queries, their appointment to a particular hospital. So a lot of application of conversational AI chatbot is there. Then if you see the travel and tourism, again, there are the uses of sign language translations, a lot of sentiment analysis from the reviews written by the users. E-commerce these days has become very popular because of this pandemic particularly. So a lot of people have gone online. Okay, so there are a lot of data is being generated. How to extract the meaningful information out of that. So if you see in various sectors of our society, we have plenty of applications of language technology. And in being in India, we have that opportunity because I also want these services to be available into the Indian languages. So I'd say that the future of NLP, particularly in India, is very promising.
Thank you, Partha. Can you also, like, if possible, think about like how far are we from, when all these services are available and there's a significant change in quality of life?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of timing, I guess this really looks like a good time to be, and Kalika, going back to your comment about many of the things that we also did in HP Labs, which were kind of way before things were ready. But I do feel that right now this is different because of the connectivity and access is there thanks to smartphone availability, mobile 4G connections being available, data being relatively cheap. So I think a lot of those ingredients are there. And then if you also look at because of the improved connectivity, people who are coming online for the first time, there is strong appetite in terms of experiencing the web and the internet in their own local or native languages. For example, according to some surveys, about 90% of the novice internet users who are coming to the internet for the first time, they want to experience the internet in their own language of their choice, which is different than English. So I think there is a great appetite, and the user base is there, and that way we have a responsibility as technology developers to kind of satisfy that need. But if you look at the current state, so while the promise and then the interest is there, and hence I think that the timing is different and appropriate this time. But in terms of the quality of where we are, I think there's a long way to go. So for example, say if you know English, then I think you are pretty well served. But as soon as you go beyond English, even to Hindi, let alone other Indian languages, your access to information and opportunities on the web takes a deep dive very quickly, right? So it results in diminished experience and creates kind of an asymmetry depending on what kind of languages you know and what thereby access to information and access opportunities you have, which is really unfortunate. But so that I think also calls for us to kind of step up and develop these kind of technologies with new advances at a rapid pace. So if we are able to make progress for many of the domains that Asif also mentioned, I think that's going to have transformative impact. For many of the things say people who know English kind of take it for granted. That's kind of impossible right now to do with a good user experience with Indian languages. One other thing maybe I could just mention is about also entertainment. Right now there is kind of interest in accessing entertainment across languages, especially if you look at, like, say, information seeking content which may be generated. The real content may be generated in a few select languages, but people want to access it from across other languages, say through videos. So how we can make those universally accessible across languages is also a challenge, but also a big opportunity.
So thank you. And I'm going to make a slightly controversial statement here, and I'd like both of you to react to it. Democracy is not actually equitable. Democracy is majoritarianism. So if we are going through that perspective, are we, with this whole democratic, data-driven approach, are we actually consigning certain languages to their death and to oblivion because they will just get subsumed by the majoritarian vote of sorts, and that community will completely lose its identity, its language, its voice in the world. So I think it's a controversial statement to make. I'd like you both to kind of comment on it. Maybe Partha, you can go first.
Sure, yeah. So Kalika, when we or at least when I say democratization, I guess I have the equitable view, and we also have to take the realities into account. I guess we are not going to get to equity of say equal performance across say languages because there are going to be challenges in terms of resources which are going to have skew across languages. But I think that should definitely be the goal. An end goal, and we should try to strive towards that. So I guess we are using democratization as a rather loose term, but at least from my perspective, equity is what I'm interested in. So both kind of inclusion, equity, and access. So by inclusion, I mean kind of providing access to as many languages as possible, and then equity is kind of the uniformity of performance or not having big skew across languages, and also the aspect of access, right? So because if you are building models and then those are only supportable in higher end smartphones, then also, and even if you have support for particular languages, because a large user segment is not going to be able to afford those kind of higher end smartphones, how do you kind of also make those technologies available on say say phones or compute devices with different resources is also, I think, an important consideration in this kind of making access available with equity in mind. So inclusion, equity, and access, I think, are three pillars that we should be striving for, and our evaluation metrics should also kind of reflect this. We have actually written a position paper on this, which is available on archive if anyone is interested in looking at these aspects.
Yeah, it's an interesting paper. I just saw it last week.
Okay, thanks. So
my question is then this, and I'll come to you for your view also on this. So Partha, if you could just add to this. So okay, equity, accessibility, and inclusion are the three pillars. Now, how, as language technologists who are trained on data modeling, algorithms at some point, or creating systems, how do we encourage language technologists to think about these three pillars, right? And how do we get them to take this into account in their entire design of a model or a system that they're going to put? What more should we be doing to get people to take notice instead of just paying lip service and then waiting for somebody to take the initiative and then do something, right?
Yeah, so I guess evaluation and appropriate benchmarks have a long way to go. Can enable many of these things, because right now lots of technologies and researchers are kind of say leaderboard driven. And then if you are able to design appropriate evaluations, which covers all of these three different axis that I mentioned, like inclusion, equity, and access, then I think that way that naturally is going to encourage people to pay attention to all of them, because like say if you want to show that like okay your method is better than the other ones, so it's not just like your performance measure that matters, which is definitely very important, but then also look at these other axes at the same time. So I think like creating representative benchmarks which covers these important axes is, I think, going to help drive better, more engagement from the community on these important problems.
Thank you, Asif.
Yes, I think that is correct. So if you can focus on creating the good benchmarking, that Partha has said, when we are creating the data, training data, let's say, or the validation set, or the test set, if you have the representations, and if we take into account all these key different factors, that obviously can be one of the ways we can address this problem. But this language endangerment or the language death is not merely only due to the method. So there are several other aspects also, if you see. So there are cultural aspects, there are socio-economical aspects also. And in a very recent paper published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, so by Linden et al. In 2021, they have given a very good statistics, it's a very good study about the language endangerment. And if you see that, it is true that when you say that this language change is because of very natural in many sense, so because of the human cultural evolutions, if you say. And there are several reasons. For example, historical context is there, colonial expansion. Then there are political reasons where the government is encouraging the bilingual or multilingual, let's say, education right from the beginning or not. Then there are social and cultural aspects also. So in many cases, if you see that the climate also, if you see that European, many of the languages death has happened because of the climate changes. In Africa, there are reasons because of their traditions, their job, when they move from one place to the other place, they change their languages. So many of the languages have actually gone to death or in the way of the endangerment because of these reasons are also there. So as a solutions, we have to, let's say, this kind of multilingual training. I'm not saying that is the only solution, but when you see the success of multilingual training in using the sophisticated deep learning methods, you see that we try to learn the relationship between the different languages. So putting the endangered languages can be one of the ways we can address these kind of problems. So I'd say that yes, so not only methods, but there are other historical, cultural, societal reasons for which the language change is happening.
So in which case, Asif, that's always the case. And I don't, there are some people who actually believe that technology doesn't cause anything. Technology just amplifies whatever the humans are doing, right? So then my question would be, there's always a socio-cultural, political, economic reason for a language dying, right? Or becoming really minority language. Now, is technology going to help prevent that, or is technology going to help accelerate that? And I'll give you an example, if you can just think about it. So we work with Idumishimi community, right? 11,000 speakers. They can all use English. They all use, if you go there, middle of Arunachal Pradesh, really isolated area, a lot of them have iPhones and things, technologically competent. So their issue is not access, their issue is not information, their issue is not education as such. Like, they're all well educated, they have access to information, etc. They are worried that if they are not they're not represented in the digital world, their identity is going to get lost, right? Because right now, they said that the only way people will know about us is if we have a digital presence, right? Now, there are several such stories. In our country, especially, like, you just have to go 10, 20 kilometers from any known town and city, and you'll find a lot of such stories, right? So then, is the current technology on the side of helping these communities, or on the side of very quickly sending them into an oblivion language-wise? Not the community, but the language is going to die. So that's the thing.
So for example, I'll start from IIT Partha. How Sir was there. So he created a center for endangered language studies. So that center is functioning. Its main target is to let's say document, digitize, and build the basic language tools for the endangered languages. Also to see that UNESCO also has rightly started an initiative at the beginning from this year to document, to preserve, and also to digitize these endangered languages all over in the world. So I would say that even in NLPM project also, we deal with the languages like Maithili is a language in Bihar. So it is spoken in a particular region. Okay. So now when we try to collect the data, so the amount of digitized data is very less, very little, nothing is there almost. Okay. So we are starting with that particular problem. And also when we try to see that what the stakeholders of this data, so who will be using this kind of models, okay, and the system at the end, we hardly, very difficult to see the users of those languages. So I understand there are challenges, but still I think through this recent NLTM project, there are certain languages so that have been considered, are taken into consideration. So many of the languages are really underprivileged. Okay, so I think these kind of initiatives should be taken, setting up very specialized centers on the big project, not only the major languages, but putting some minority languages, creating the resources, tools. I think that way that can be a part of the whole, I think, development of language technology, I would say.
Yeah. So related to this, I have another question, Partha, if you could answer that. And that is that we tend to club endangered languages, minority language into one group, as if they're all kind of a homogeneous thing. But that's really, like, we all know that's really not true. Even in that group, languages behave very differently. They have very different, communities have very different needs, requirements, etc., etc. Now, if there were three things that you would advise somebody who's setting out on this noble mission to make language technology more equitable, if there were three things that you could tell them that this is something that you must do, especially in the Indian context, what would those three things be? And I'll come to you after that for this.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So I know I've kind of like thrown this at you, but
No, that's okay. Yeah, so let me see if I can think about these three. So yeah, I guess there is like a gradation of. So I'm thinking in terms of resources that are available, and let's say that with say current pre-training models, multilingual models, if you're using that as our main say tool to kind of say increase coverage of languages, there is a spectrum there, right? So because you have some languages with lots of corpora relatively, right? I mean, which could also be low compared to say Western languages, but even within Indian languages, and then you have the torso and maybe the tail languages with no resources at all, right? So it's quite conceivable that the same methods are not going to work across all of these, right? So how say the methods currently, I guess we have some methods which can kind of work if you have say some decent amount of corpora, even unlabeled. But if you kind of go to languages with lots of speakers but not enough resources available, then what do you do? So I think that calls for kind of new method development. So and I feel that in order to really scale this, we need to take a more participatory approach, because for many of these languages, even though it's kind of spoken, maybe there's a writing system available, but not much of digital presence, and we cannot expect to build say large corpora overnight or in short period of time, right? So how to engage with members of these communities and who speak these languages, right? And then how we can in some resource efficient manner collect the right type of data to to increase the coverage. So one approach that we have been taking in collaboration with Sunita and her students at IIT Bombay is, let's say that if you want to go to a new language where we have either little or no corpora at all, so can we use say bilingual lexicons to do some sort of cheap translation for related languages, which might still give us noisy translation, but enough signal for these say deep learned models to extract enough signals during pre-training, right? So thinking along those kind of lines, maybe how you can engage with members of these communities and get resources quickly so that we can scale. That might be, I think, one direction to explore. Looking at different modalities could be another, right? Because for certain languages, it could be that even though that text data is not available in sufficient quantity, but maybe there is spoken data that's available because there is a TV station or a radio station that's available. So and which has been producing data. So how we can leverage not only the multilinguality but also multimodality, because for these different languages the coverage of these two might be complementary, and how we can leverage all of these things together. So I guess those are two things that comes to mind, I guess, thinking along innovative methods and engaging with the community in some constructive resource efficient way, and then also looking beyond text and other modalities and how we can incorporate all of those to develop language technologies quickly for these languages.
Thank you.
I think I will echo the same voice of Partha. So yes, this is true, because engaging the community and respecting a particular language. So that means if you take a language, so you should be actually take that language for in that form. How can you bring that language in the form? One is that you have to focus on building the speech and the language-based technology for that particular language. So you have to engage the community in collecting the data, and then the human in the loop, if you take, so that actually will help to create the data rapidly. Also, the multimodality, as Partha said, that is another way, because even for Maithili language, I will be giving an example that getting this digital data was very difficult. But then I heard that the Bhagalpur radio stations actually they actually when the PM's modules, the Man Ki Baat, okay, that particular program, they actually translate into the Maithili language. So then I found that okay, there is a kind of the direct, let's say, the applications who can be roped into in this particular initiative. I think the multilingual, along with the multilinguality, because of that multimodality, is also can be an important, I think, way to get the data. Okay, so I'll say that.
Yeah, and slightly, this is my kind of second last question. My slightly related to this is, which is not necessary just for endangered languages, but for all Indian languages. So, given the Indian context, because we talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about ethics and social biases that are there, and they kind of do get contextualized to the environment that we're in, and some of the ethical concerns that might be relevant for, say, the West, completely different set of concerns might be relevant for the Indian context. So when we are actually doing large-scale data collection, building these, large multilingual models for Indian languages, for use in India. Let's not just say Indian languages, like for use in India. What are the ethical and bias-related pitfalls that we should be aware of while doing it? I mean, I'm not like saying that we can resolve all of it in like a discussion amongst us, but what are some of the most obvious things that we should be aware of?
Concerns.
No, not just concerns, but like ethical pitfalls. Like, this is you don't have enough women in your speech data, right? And that's not a concern. That's like if you discover it way ahead when you've actually built the system, then you'll be kind of gone, right? So actual concerns, the actual things, yeah. Diversity could be one thing, but there could be other ethical concerns.
Yes, gender, for example. Then also there are experiments, for example, particularly in Western world, they have shown that the algorithms or the models that are developed, how they are biased to in medical setting, for example, how they are biased to a particular white people over the black, for example. How the model is biased to the majority and compared to the minority, and in the judiciary system when they try to make the decisions through machines. So I think those are the points when we are collecting the data, gathering the data. These kind of aspects, I think we should take into consideration. But for the Indian language, it is not so easier because getting the digital data itself is a very difficult task. Now, you want to remove the bias, for example, the cultural bias, then the community-based bias, then the gender bias. So I think so at the same time, the data collection itself, data curation itself will be a very challenging problem to solve.
Yeah. So, Partha, related to that, what do you think about data sovereignty as a thing? Like, this whole thing of who the data is from, where is the data being used, how the data is going to, be evaluated, etc. Do you think these are along with the metrics that you talked about earlier? These are some of the important things that we should insist on kind of at least documenting for every data that we collect in India. And that could be one way. I don't know what you think about that. That could be one way of at least becoming more aware of the ethical and biased nature of some of the things that we do.
Right. Yeah. So I guess kind of like these mechanisms, like say data cards and all, and there are like a few other frameworks like that, right? So it's kind of goes into these details and then kind of addresses these like maybe we should be using those or some representative form of that kind as like a by default, so that like people who are using it are aware at least upfront that like what are the limitations and pitfalls that are there, because I mean we can be, first of all, we should definitely be explicit and conscious about this, and we can only kind of like maybe cover some of these aspects. It will be great if we can like be completely unbiased, but probably that will be like a difficult goal to reach, but at least we should try to mitigate as much as we can. So I think having explicit documentations of those data sets covering these aspects is very much essential. And then while collecting the data itself, the diversity you mentioned, covering like the different target user bases, gender, education levels, rural versus urban population, so that ultimately it's not that like the methods that we create on the data sets are only serving one particular slice of the population, but it's able to like cater to a broader segment of those. And then also like use being conscious of things like what kind of devices you are using to collect that data, right? For example, if you are say collecting data which requires like the higher end smartphones, then you are only collecting data from like a particular segment of the society, but not kind of like representative enough. So I think being very conscious about all of those aspects is super important. And yeah, so we've been actively thinking about these directions, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of our thoughts on this quite soon.